Hello and welcome to the bridge. I'm joined this week, as every week, by my enigmatic co-host Zach. And this week we have a new album. Actually, it's an album we've already sort of talked about. We mentioned it in one of our in the previous omnibus. We decided to do a full scale review on Nick Cave and Warren Ellis's Carnage because I honestly thought it was one of the more interesting releases that has come out, and I thought we should take a closer look into it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting for a number of reasons. Specifically, how they decided to not release it underneath the Bad Seeds moniker. And Warren Ellis is a longtime member of the Bad Seeds. I would say he's perhaps the helm of the band outside of Nick Cave.
Right, so they've been working together, from my understanding, since the '90s.
Yeah, since the 90s for sure. I can't remember. I can't recall exactly on which album Warren Ellis entered the Bad Seeds.
Okay,
But maybe it was Let Love In. I'm not I'd have to look it up.
it's kind of
But
interesting because I've worked on some film scores together, Warren Ellis and Nick Cave, and Warren Ellis has always been part of the Bad Seeds for quite a while, since like the '90s, some album. Uh, and Warren is also prominently produced several albums, solo albums from Nick Cave, like Ghost Teen, which I believe was a pretty big release from this decade. So it is kind of interesting.
that was a Bad Seeds record.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he was like
Um.
head producer on these as well. What is Nick Cave's last solo release? Was that the Skeleton Key?
No, he doesn't release music. It's always usually on with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. He doesn't release music.
Solo. Okay.
Yeah, just under Nick Cave.
Okay.
Um. They do have another side project called Grinder Man, but they haven't released any new music through Grinder Man since the early 2010s. I think 2012 was the last Grinder Man release.
Yeah. So it's kind of curious, like why they decided to go with the collaborative labeling for this one versus some of their other albums, instead of just making this a Bad Seed. I guess from my understanding, this is kind of more of a place they came to because of COVID restrictions, and it was just easier to work between Warren and Nick Cave's individually.
And that makes sense because I watched a Nick Cave documentary recently within the past few months, and both of them are based in Brighton now. That's sort of where they settled down.
Okay.
And during the documentary, it's sort of like a day in the life of Nick Cave while they were putting together the archive material for the Nick Cave Museum in Copenhagen and Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, he goes to Warren Ellis's house, and they're just sort of reminiscing about, back in the day, and they have a recording session, and it all takes place in Brighton. And so, because of the pandemic, it would make sense that they were able to just do a collaborative effort between the two of them,
Right.
more intimate, not incorporating other band members.
Yeah. It kind of. I think it was a choice by situation. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's kind of how it feels. But you're fairly familiar with their discography, and I'm more of a breezy watcher from the sidelines. This is probably the second album from Nick Cave, from beginning to end, that I've listened to, which my other one would have been Boatman's Call from. I think you said like 20 years ago. I think that album came out.
It came out in 97 or 98. It was a breakup album dealing with, yeah, Nick Cave's breakup with PJ Harvey.
Okay. So that and like a few singles here and there, Red Right Hand, stuff like that, I've heard. I heard a track or two off Murder Ballads, but I couldn't remember what they were at this point. Um, and for this album, and listen to this, I did expand and listen to a little bit more. I went back and listened to some Birthday Party. Um, Nikki, was it Nikki the Stripper? I think I listened to.
Uh-huh.
A very very interesting song. I kind of liked it. It was very abrasive and out there, and just kind of chaotic. Not you could see where that was the root of where he is now, but he it was definitely more in his punk teen years, and it came out in his music, from what I could tell. I don't know if he's released much under that, the birthday party.
No, the birthday party are dissolved. They dissolved in the early '80s, and then they made the Bad Seeds, I think, in '84. But yeah, when they were recording underneath the birthday party, that's when he was living in West Berlin, which was like the heroin capital of the world, and he was addicted to heroin and
Okay, that makes
just
sense.
living a really like chaotic rock star lifestyle, living in some dude's closet and just playing live shows and yeah.
Yeah, if you
And
listen to the birthday
they
party,
had
it
all
sounds like
came
that.
from Australia and were touring around Europe. Like they were incredibly raw at that point. And what you get on this record is somebody who's been in recording music for almost 40 years now and is fully formed and in their late to mature period.
The other album I touched on for this album was I listened to a little bit of Ghost Teen, um, and I kind of familiarized myself a little bit with this kind of concept that, and you might be able to speak more of this. Is like there's a trio of albums from the 2010s, I believe, that kind of had to do with his son's passing.
Well, the first album, Push the Sky Away, released in the early 2010s before the incident with his son occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a notable shift in sound to a far more spacey, ethereal type sound that incorporated some more synths. The lyrical presentation was far more cryptic, and then that had a took a on a new form with Skeleton Tree because they had written all the songs for that record, but then during the recording and the production phase, his son tragically passed away, and so then they changed gears, and that became a very melancholic record. The way that it sounded,
Are you talking about
and
Push
then
the was it Push the
no,
Skyway?
this is the record that came out after Push the Skyway called Skeleton Tree. I think it came
Yes.
out in
Okay.
2015 or 2016.
Okay.
And then Ghosteen is sort of it was a double LP and was very much more in this ethereal, heavenly vein. The album cover is even sort of new agey. There's like unicorns, and it's like in this weird Garden of Eden paradise setting. And it's sort of him coming to grips with the passing of his son, and it's meditative conclusion to that cycle of albums.
Right. So this album is of note. The one that we're talking about today, Carnage, is of note because there are, for the first time in quite a long time, from my understanding, Nick Cave delivers a little more attitude and swagger on some of these songs than he's done in quite a while.
On the first half of the record, yes.
Yes. On the second half of the record, to get into kind of bits of the record, the second half is a lot more like the previous three, from what my understanding. It was more like Ghost Teen and more like Skeleton Tree.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It seems like for me, it was to describe what my listening experience was. It was a little bit disappointing because for the first half of the record, they're building you up to think that they've captured a new sound, they're evolving their sound with the it's still sort of meditative in quality musically. It's quite repetitive, but they use a lot of wiry, just striking guitar chords. Or Warren Ellis has some morose sounding violin chords, and then but Nick Cave has got some of this older aggression in his voice that you would sort of associate with maybe Dig Lazarus Dig or some of the earlier Nandi's records. However, on the back end of the record, that all sort of goes away and it becomes far more lighter in tone. It's n- even though the content is contemplates the pandemic situation and can sort of incorporate love ballads,
Hmm.
but the vocal presentation is far more intimate and not so aggressive and doesn't bring the same energy.
Well, let's get a little bit into that first side a bit. One thing I wanted to ask you about Nick Cave a little bit is he someone who's historically used electronic elements in his music, like synths and stuff like that?
This is something that has really occurred in the last decade or so.
Okay, because he starts out this album kind of how I kind of expected him to, with Hand of God, with this kind of like a almost a setup for like a ballad. Um,
Mhm.
he kind of comes in, he's singing, and delivers the first verse before this very distorted, high rising string section plays, and it just transitions into this almost electronic beat after that. And I was kind of curious if that was something unique to his sound going into this album or something he had experimented with before. But with my limited exposure to Nick Cave, this was new to me.
Yeah, well, I think also the with the shifting band members of the Bad Seeds, Warren Ellis has sort of, like I said earlier, taken the is at the helm of the band now, and he's classically trained. And so I think since his position in the band has become more solidified and he plays a more prominent role in the musical direction, the sound has incorporated far more of these orchestral string arrangements.
Right, and he's a violinist by trade, I'll say. So a lot
Yeah,
of the music that Warren Ellis brings and a lot of the compositionals that he'll bring to the album are usually more string based.
yeah, right.
Um, but like I said, on the first song, "Hand of God," he goes into like this. How would I describe it? The way I've gotten it written here in my notes is it was an oddly paced song, with a particularly with it being an opening track. He delivers his opening lyrics in a slow rising string and slow piano, and it gives this impression you're about to listen to a standard ballad. But then, pretty abruptly, 25 seconds into the song, it changes entirely and brings out these interesting drum beats, the kind of electronic and dancey. Even though the song itself is not a dancey song, the the dancey drum is still part of the song, and it kind of gives it a weird feeling, especially as it goes through and Nick Cave's baritone vocals are going, um, and then now the strings over the electronic beat. There's, it just came off like very David Lynchian, and kind of how the sounds were coming together, kind of like a little Twin Peaks. And I kind of enjoyed it, but it was definitely odd the first few times I listened to it, and it kind of took me a bit to kind of get into it.
I would say the comparison you made to David Lynch is interesting because I found the album to it is a little bit cinematic, the musical landscapes they're creating.
Hmm.
And yeah, this song is a testament to that. And to follow up with what you were saying, yeah, it starts out with these classical chords, but then they incorporate, yeah, this I don't know if I'd call it a dancey beat, but it's playing at a different tempo. It has a and it's electronic, so you have both like the analog and the digital playing off each other. And I thought, oh wow, this is interesting. This is a sort of a new sound for them, but it seemed like a logical progression based on where they were coming from with the previous three records. I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the refrain on this track? Hand of God, hand of God, hand of God.
Hand of God, hand of God, hand of God. It's great. That
Yeah,
that whole hand of God refrain is actually, I think, what sells the song for me. It brings everything together and actually kind of like brings some interesting personality out of it. Where I think, because it's like a 5 minute song, and most of
yeah.
these songs are on this album. I should say there's eight of them, and most of them are about four and a half to 5 minutes long on average. So one of the things I kind of will talk about a little bit is I think some of the songs didn't have enough to fill the time frame that they're given. And if it wasn't for this refrain of "Hand of God," I think that would be something that the first track suffered from. But because of this "Hand of God" refrain, it brings a lot of energy and kind of like holds the length of the track together. Plus the kind of interesting string arrangements kind of like do their part, and Nick Cave's baritone voice is unique in its own respect. So I think honestly the refrain was the highlight of the track. It kind of really pulled all the pieces together. Without it, I think the track kind of gets a little redundant and a little dragged on at the end.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the refrain, honestly. Not with the idea of the refrain itself, but just the way it's sung.
You think so?
Yeah, because he comes out sort of storms blazing in his voice. It's a more of an aggressive tone. It was quite gripping for me, and I'm coming from the perspective of like a longtime fan of the band, and I was really excited. And then this light sounding "Hand of God," very not distorted, but they have certainly done some production on his voice in the refrain, and it's not something that would be able to be recreated in a live performance.
Are you saying that's Nick? Wouldn't have put the two and two together. I wouldn't have realized that was Nick Cave's voice. I would have thought that's a backup singer.
No, that was Nick Cave's voice.
Oh, really? They just distorted it. See,
He's got a pretty long range. If you listen to especially the past few records, he hits these higher ranges.
Okay. See,
But
I
they've
always took it as like a backup singer that he had on the track.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it because it came out very orchestral and anthemic, and I thought it really added this really kind of like interesting side to the song.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest with
get
you, I didn't think Nick Cave's vocals were all that interesting on this track.
Oh yeah. No, it was like a chapter of the old book, which is something for longtime fans. I think even though the new music is good, there was a certain aggression missing from his vocal delivery that this song brings, and that other songs on the first half of the album bring, that are exciting.
There's definitely parts where I think he definitely gets aggressive on these opening tracks, particularly White Elephant and even a bit on Shattered Ground. I thought were very interesting. But I thought some of these other tracks, he kind of is in this realm of kind of comfort that sometimes if I'm not paying attention, I can kind of lose track of him a bit. He kind of like blends in, I thought. But you're saying
Well,
that he's a little more aggressive even on those tracks from where he's been.
uh, on the back end of the album, you mean?
Just across the whole album, I would say. I think the
No,
main examples of his aggressive vocals come from White Elephant and Shattered Ground.
yeah, Shattered Ground a little bit, I guess, but White Elephant and I would say this track here, Hand of God,
Okay.
uh, are more reminiscent of older Nick Cave.
Okay.
And even, have you taken a peek at the lyrics of this song? Like, it's
I
essentially,
did. Um, they were interesting, but I wasn't. They were kind of a little obtuse. He talks a lot about this river and going into the middle of the river and um, just swimming there, and then your body is a river on the hotel on a hotel bed, and I kind of got a little lost. Like there are interesting visuals that he creates in this song, but I didn't really pull quite a concrete meaning or anything from them.
yeah, well, his lyrics, especially, like, over the past decade, have become far more visual based and are very much jump from image to image
Hmm.
without necessarily having strong links between the images. However, like this album song, in my opinion, is about someone who's contemplating committing suicide.
They do kind of play with that image a bit. Like it says here, like after the refrain of like "hand of God" and coming from the sky, he's saying he's going to swim to the middle, stay there for a while, way down low, way down low, let the river cast its spell. So I was kind of getting that idea as well. This kind of like contemplating suicide, contemplating like, is it really all worth it? It's when he starts talking about like the singing boys sitting on the bridge, throwing pennies at the edge, and the peasants working in the fields keep their heads way down low, don't want to let on what they know, and this whole section there kind of like didn't fit that kind of theory I was building. And then he brings up, "You're a body of water flowing across the bed. You're a body of water spread across the hotel bed." And there felt to me like there was more going on here than this kind
Yeah,
of idea of suicide. I kind of got lost. I was like, what is exactly happening here?
this record, as far as the lyrics go, I like a lot of the lyrics, but sometimes his way to get to where he's going is a little bit strange. And even on Ghosteen, he had a lot of these references to motels and hotel beds. I don't know what his fascination is with those. I guess, being on the road and
Yeah.
as a musician, that sort of thing stands out in your mind.
He also likes to talk
But
about the kingdom of God a lot, from what I've noticed.
yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just, obviously with the passing of his son, that must have been a pretty racking existential experience. So I don't think him to be a Christian per se,
No,
but
I don't mean that
that's
one.
just
I think he talks about it almost like just as like an imagery to cast and to use in his lyrics. I don't find him to be super religious. I think he just likes religious imagery in his lyrics. And because I'm pretty sure back on Boatman's Call there was a song with kingdom in it as well.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So like that was before obviously the tragedy happened. So I think he has like a fascination with these kind of images. But this song here, I thought the lyrics were kind of interesting, but I actually enjoyed lyrics more on some of these other tracks where he created more interesting visuals with kind of what he wrote. But before I get to some of those other tracks, I think we'll move on. I was actually let's move on to the second track because it will kind of bring my point together here. Old Time. In the first track and in this track, there is a audio motif going on where the hard transition that happens in the first song after 25 seconds with the descending string. Do you know what I'm talking about when I mention that?
yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. The descending sound that recurs throughout the song.
It occurs through the second song here, Old Time,
Yeah.
but it first shows up in Hand of God after that 25 seconds. How did you think about that transition in the first 25 seconds of the album? How did you take that? Because he does start the song very kind of standard ballady. He sings the first verse where he's like, some people are trying to find out who, some people are trying to find out why. There's some people aren't trying to find anything but the kingdom in the sky. And then he delivers that line, and then all of a sudden this descending chord, it's like very abrupt and abrasive in the mix that happens, and then it transitions into that kind of electronic drum that has a lot of energy, but also then some rising strings and descending strings that kind of give it a weird Lynchian vibe to me. Um, but I wanted to more specifically talk about that transition and how you felt about it.
I thought it was cool. I thought it was a great way to introduce the record and to announce the evolution of their sound, and it immediately hooked me as a longtime fan as to what was in store on this record.
I didn't like it the first time because I thought it was placed very awkwardly. It was very abrupt, and it didn't really. It just felt like such a hard cut so immediately that it was hard to kind of figure out what was really going on there. And maybe my lack of history with the band is kind of missed kind of some context. Um, but I thought it was like such an uh, odd placement and transition, and especially with how the abruptness and kind of how clashing it is. Like it's almost like mid lyric that it happens. Um, but then it returns this kind of descending chord. It returns in Hand of God several times, almost like 3 or 4 times. They use it, but they incorporate into the instrumentals a lot better. So yeah, it happens. There's this descending chord throughout the song, like almost a motif, sound motif. And I thought this was going to recur throughout the album, and he would come back to this a little more, and maybe the later tracks, and there would be some sort of point to it. But he used it in the first track. He used it like 4 times in this track, and then I never hear it again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The album is sort of split in two,
Right.
and you know this abrasive sound that you're describing from this descending chord is very characteristic of the more aggressive sound that you get on the first end of the album, whereas on the back end, yeah, it disappears.
Right. It's definitely a like a 2 half album, and the first half is a it's got a little more spunk to it, and a little more like interest in terms of the the soundscape, and then the second half. I don't actually have that much of an issue with the second half. Um, but again, I'm not coming from these previous 3 albums where maybe I'm a little more fatigued on that sound, which some people might be. I actually enjoyed a few of these second half songs. There's only like one song on the second half that I didn't particularly enjoy. But let's focus a little bit on Old Time a bit. It's just the first. This is a song from the first half, and it was that motif that kind of caught me off because I was really thinking about it the whole time because I didn't understand where this was going. And there's a lot of interesting places that they use that motif on this song. Like there's a part where they almost stretch it and like reverb it in a different way, and it fits in with the rising and descending strings that he's using to create atmosphere, and it kind of like it's almost like it's snuck in there, like it's a little more subtle than the other ones, where the other ones are a little more jarring and blunt. Um, there's actually a section of the song.
What do you?
Let's go ahead.
I was gonna ask you, what do you think of the wiry guitar chord? They just strike in this wiry guitar chord throughout this song, and
Yeah,
I think it's a great accent.
yeah. That comes in like halfway through
Yeah.
because they do this amazing string section that connect verses in this song. It connects like basically the first half of the song to the second half of the song, essentially in Old Time. There's this amazing string section that it gets topped off with this wiry reverb guitar sound, and then he gets it back into the next verse. And now for the rest of the song, and after that verse begins, there's a little accent on a bunch of things with that wiry reverb guitar, and I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah, and what do you make of the lyrics on this track? I find the lyrics on this track to be some of the more unusual, odd, and perhaps the ones I don't like the most. I like the closing image and this refrain that he always gets to about not being that far behind.
Right.
But the way he gets there is just so strange.
I enjoyed I enjoy when he gets descriptive in here, and he opens the song with like wide black trees and a field of frost. Birds fly low, and you and me in the car are lost. It's when he gets in this kind of pocket that I really enjoyed his lyrics more. There's other examples on the album. Let me refer to them. There's from some of the other songs, and we'll get to them. It's when he writes like I'm a 200-pound octopus under a sheet, dancing around your world with my hands and feet, or is I'm Botticelli Venus with a penis riding an enormous scallop fan. I'm a seed foam woman rising from the spray, and I'm coming to do you harm. It's like when he writes so expressively and wildly in his imagery. That's where I really hook into what he's saying.
Yeah, sometimes it gets a little bit. He pushes it a little too far as unusual imagery goes. You could almost say ridiculous. Like the image about the octopus. I think that's just bizarre.
It
But
is.
the image about the woman who manifests from the sea spray, I thought that was a great image. It was like something you'd read in Greek mythology or something.
You know what it kind of reminds me of, and this is an odd comparison to pull. An Airplane Over the Sea. All the imagery on that album in the folk writing is super supernaturally and weird. The three-headed boy and stuff like that, and even the album art, and that's kind of the imagery of similar inspiration that he writes some places on this album, like the octopus line, that I really enjoyed. I kind of like that kind of like creative imagery.
What record are you referring to?
Airplane Over the Sea, Neutral Milk Hotel.
Uh-huh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so the album In the Airplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel has like King of Carrot Flowers and the Two-Headed Boy, and obviously Holland 1945, and all these songs are super creative in their imagery. And Nick Cave gets into this kind of pocket sometimes where he creates very interesting creative imagery as well, that I really enjoy. And that's the pocket where he gets into this album where I enjoy the lyrics and I have something to grasp onto, and it really kind of motivates my listening. There's other times when he doesn't get so uh, creative with his imagery, and he kind of fades back into these weird refrains and stuff like that I kind of lose him sometimes.
So, like, the refrain on this song, for instance, while stopping at a motel and go jumping into bed. And this is the refrain, just like the old time. Yeah, wherever you are, darling, I'm not that far behind.
Yeah, so I guess I should have said verse, not refrain, because it's some of the verses and some of the stuff he says in between the refrains and or the choruses, even though there's not quite emphasis on choruses on this album. Sometimes he goes into these little pockets where he's not really being descriptive, and I'm in that kind of like imaginative way. And I'm not always like reading his lyrics to try and find all the meanings and stuff every time I'm listening to it. And the more lighter and breezy listens I go through here, it's the creative imagery that I latch on to and I find engaging, and keeps me a part of the song. Where sometimes when he pulls away from that, I can get a little lost.
Well, I would say that I have a more or less opposite experience because without some of these refrains that tie the song together, it's almost like he's reading just passages of poetry over music.
Yeah.
And for me, that can become a little bit tiresome. And I always check out the lyrics on a Nick Cave record because he's a great writer. But sometimes, especially with this new mode of lyricism that he's adopted over the past decade, he really pushes the imagery, the poetic quality of the writing, you could say. And sometimes the idea of a song structure or songwriting can become a little bit lost in favor for something a little more literary.
Yeah, I can definitely pick that up here. Although I thought Warren does a good job of creating like a tone and atmosphere that's kind of menacing and
Yeah.
interesting. Um, I think after a while, sometimes if they don't keep it new and they're not advancing kind of like the songwriting, it does kind of fall into like this poetry reading that can get a little numb.
Yeah, but like you said, Warren Ellis does a great job, and I mean both of them are working together on the music. But Warren Ellis can create great atmospheres, and I think that's comes out of his work doing movie soundtracks, and it's what gives this record somewhat of a cinematic quality, which plays in favor of Nick Cave's lyrical songwriting. But just to take one example from this song, and then we'll have to move on. There's a lyric that goes, "By the side of the road is a thing with horns, steps back into the trees, and a child is born. On this trembling earth, displays each day, thrown across the hallucination of your hair, a strip of ordinary sun, a biblical sun, a colonial sun, an enlightened sun." And it's just in creating a bunch of images. I understand maybe sometimes the images don't need to mean anything, but it just becomes a little bit preposterous.
Sure. Okay. I
And
get
I
it.
find that to be sometimes tiresome. When it works, it really works, like the quote you quoted earlier. But in cases like the lines I just said, ah, God.
Yeah. So let's move on to Carnage, which is the title track of the album. How'd you find? What did you think of Carnage?
Carnage is one of my favorite lyrical tracks, but musically I thought it was just okay. It didn't really strike me. I was a little bit indifferent to it musically.
I like the kind of like stringy, synthy melody that goes throughout the song. It's introduced like almost immediately, and then kind of built upon as the song goes. I thought this was the first really compelling vocally that Nick Cave was on the album.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is probably the song vocally and lyrically that reminds me of what you would consider to be like a Boatman's Call era Nick Cave, which is the record you're really familiar with.
I think this is kind of cute. There's a lyric in here. It's only love and a little bit of pain of rain. Kind of buried the lead here, but I thought the lyric was it's only love and a little bit of pain and not rain. When I was first listening to this, and I was kind of vibing with the previous, so I was like, oh, a little bit. I kind of like that. But rain is fine too, and it kind of works with this motif that he builds up with the going down the mountain in the rain in a train. He a rhyming train and rain is kind of simple, but the way he goes about it is there's a little more impact going on here than sounds. But
You had a Freudian slip.
yeah, I thought that was a kind of a cute little thing I noticed when I was going through the lyrics. Like, oh, I've been singing that wrong the whole time.
Yeah, but yeah, I like this. The way he introduces that image of the rain and the train in the early and the mountains in the first stanza of the song, and then when you get to the last stanza, he sings, "It's only love, and it comes on like a train. It's only love rolling down the mountains in the rain." Yeah, I thought that was quite beautiful.
Right. This was my first true highlight song for my listens. The lyrics are more direct, even though they still hold an air of interpretation. The imagery is a little more compelling, and the narrative is a little more defined, I think, in the song. So it was a little more easy to grasp onto and really enjoy the track. So it was really well received on my end. This was like one of my favorite songs, I think. I enjoyed the backing vocals as well on this track. Sometimes, again, I think Cave can drone on a little bit in his baritone vocal style. That kind of gets a little grating for me near the end of it. But in this one, he pops his performance a bit, and it gives you something more to grip onto. It's a little more dramatic singing, and a little. It's really kind of melodramatic, honestly, when he performs that line. It's only love and a little bit of bit of rain. The way he performs that line is really I could listen to it all day. It's so juicy.
Yeah, like this is a track that I can really picture them playing live and it being a very intimate song and it really captivating the entire audience. And yeah, I would really like to see this. And it's not so. There's a lot of production on some of these earlier tracks that we already mentioned,
Hmm.
which I think would be hard to replicate in a concert setting. However, this song is very, very beautifully written and something that can be replicated live.
Right. There's a he mentions like a child in here, the son, a barefoot child with fire in his hair, and then the son explodes. Uh, I don't know much about his son, and I wasn't sure if he was referencing his son with that line because he sings it with such emotion that like it makes me wonder if that's maybe where that kind of motivation came from. But I also know he's had like two albums really to get that kind of writing onto paper, so I'm not sure if maybe I'm reading too much into what's going on there.
No, I think it's fair to say the imagery of the sun, which occurs several times on the record, is a pun on, yeah, the actual sun, the literal sun, and then the figurative sun, the sun that he lost.
Right. And so this is kind of coming into like the midpoint of the album where White Elephant hits, which is the most chaotic and aggressive track on the whole album.
So this song is certainly one of the more aggressive songs that Nick Cave has written in many years, and it has some of the most outlandish lyrics on the album, and also deals with themes relating to the climate crisis and environmentalism. And there's a lot to dig into on this track, and it comes in the middle of the album and it really functions as the record's centerpiece.
It really does. I don't know about his history of aggression, but from my understanding of his previous work this last decade, that this was really the tonal shift that people were interested in and really compelled by because he does get very aggressive on this track. In fact, this is the first
Yeah, well,
track he swears.
yeah, that's right. And it's very, I mean, he wrote an album called Murder Ballads. The whole album is folk tales of serial killers.
Right, right.
And so the lyrics dive into, yeah, lyrics that you see on this track. With my elephant gun of tears, I'll shoot you all for free. If you ever think about coming in here, I'll shoot you in the fucking face if you ever think of coming around here.
Right. He gives it off, which lets see the menace that it's really compelling to like just listen to him go off and just comparing kind of like the way he wrote this song with some of the earlier songs. I felt like they kind of become a little more muted to me after listening to this and kind of like the upper range of aggression and menace and compelling performance that he gives off in this song.
Yeah, the sinister tone that has been absent from his music for some time, and I think for some of us we thought was perhaps a thing of the past. Um, and I can see what you mean on repeated listens. The earlier tracks can seem like they're just really building towards towards this climactic performance that he gives here.
I almost feels like it builds to the first time he swears because like he's so eloquent with all his other writings and stuff, and then he gets so crass there and swears, and it really emphasizes the lyric and adds more power to it. I really enjoyed it, and this is the song, obviously, of the woman coming from the spray that I mentioned earlier with the arms of seahorses and coming to do you harm. This is actually a really interesting lyrical song. You mentioned environmentalism and stuff like that, but there's also like reference to the more recent George Floyd protest. I believe right here, a protester kneels on the neck of a statue. The statue says, "I can't breathe." The protester says, "Now you know how it feels," and kicks it into the sea. And this idea of like kicking in and tearing down these old Civil War statues to these that was going on during this protest, and I think this brings upon that image as they kick it into the sea. In fact, I got this sense of like Nick Cave was taking the narrator's position as like white power and kind of that aggressive like racism, and he was kind of speaking with his elephant gun and his aggression and kind of like towards these protesters and towards these other people, and I think that's kind of where he's coming from.
Definitely the narrative voice that he assumes.
Right.
But then the images that he uses are very much images of the other side. So like this sort of racist anti-environmentalist guy, he's going to shoot you in the face with an elephant gun of tears. You know, it evokes this image of weeping elephants.
Right, right.
And then the George Floyd reference that you made earlier, and then the the destruction of the statues that was happening earlier in 2020.
Right. He also does this very interesting gospel flip at the end, like for the second half of the song, and I think this is where I was saying he has this romanticism with using religious imagery, but I have no precursor belief that he is a religious man because the way he uses his voice as a narrator on this song and then brings into this gospel nature, it kind of releases the sentiment that God is used for many things, but not all good, and kind of this idea that what they're doing is for a greater cause, and God is on their side, kind of thing.
Yeah, it was, for me, there's, yeah, like you said, a stark shift in the song completely, really, in tone and music.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes far more, yeah, like heavenly and ethereal, and his lyrics change quite a lot. And so does the music to match that shift in tone. But it had a bit of an apocalyptic vision of the future, or not of the future, of the present moment, to comment on how it's a very tumultuous time in the world, and that we're going through this tumultuous time, and then we'll come out better for it and start it with a new beginning when it's over. This sound that occurs on the second half of the song is really the sound that prevails over the rest of the record.
Right. How did you feel about the second half of the record? Because I think this might be where we diverge a little bit, and I thought we might because I'm not familiar with some of the last few albums he released, and I think the big critique on the second half is how it kind of pulls back into that realm after establishing such interesting um, energy and aggression and menace in these early tracks.
Yeah, well, they capture a new sound in the first half of the record, but then they sort of, in my opinion, go back to what they've been doing, especially on Ghosteen, where all of the musical arrangements are very ethereal and there are not any harsh chords anymore. The vocal delivery is lost its sense of aggression, and it's far more meditative, and that's certainly okay, but I think if they would have taken like that descending chord that you spoke of in Old Time and put it into one of these tracks, then it would have at least gave the album a better sense of symmetry, whereas the album is sort of broken into two halves. And the second half of the album, for me, becomes very monotonous, I guess you could say, in the sense that the sound from track to track, there's very little variance.
I think the biggest culprit of what you're describing is Lavender Fields. I thought
Hmm.
this was lyrically, he's kind of talking about the kingdom in the sky again. I just felt like that song just kind of existed and fluttered by without me really uh, having much to say. In fact, when I do my note writing, generally some of my first listens, I'll just listen to the song, and if I'm compelled by a thought or an observation, I'll pause the song and go write it down before I lose it, right? And I listened to this song beginning to end, and I think the only thing I wrote down was he said "Kingdom in the Sky" again. Like nothing in the song really compelled any thought or critique from me. It just felt like it existed and just from. It just kind of seems like it's over in no time, and it's not really even that long of a song. If I checking here, it's 4.5 minutes, but it just feels like complete like cloudiness, like just a fog that comes over me when this song comes on into the album.
Yeah, and it really it's a bit tiresome. It fatigues me on the record a little bit, and for that reason, I think the last two tracks, once I dug into the lyrics, I developed a new appreciation for them. But before then, I was starting to tune out of the record by the time Lavender Fields was over.
Yeah, and part of that's because Albuquerque is such a nice, pleasant, pleasy, wistfully kind of song that having that right next to Lavender Fields, I think, was a little much. I think that kind of
Yeah.
also goes against it. Albuquerque, just to go over a little quickly, is a kind of more of a ballad cave, and it's a goes through the whole song. It's a nice. He's very tuneful in the song and whimsical, and a very uplifting kind of feel to it. Warren is great on this one again. It's just a very pleasant song that he does a little ballad. And, this is the best way I can tell it. It's a little bit of a COVID thematic going on there. How he's like, we're not gonna get to Albuquerque, we won't get to the lake in Africa or whatever he references unless you wish me there or something like that, or and it's kind of like that kind of sentiment that you're not going anywhere here in COVID, and it kind of puts a even though it's a kind of a COVID themed song, I thought it still kind of fit. It's not very blunt with its kind of that kind of theme, and it was very nice and sweet, and I enjoyed Albuquerque. It's also probably the shortest song at like 3 minutes 57 seconds, which helped it a lot. But it's just like a pleasing song. It's inoffensive, but after the menace of the earlier half of the album, I welcomed Albuquerque. I thought it was a nice variety. I just thought it was a little compounded next to Lavender Fields, and Lavender Fields was really fluffy and dismissive.
Yeah, I think it's a good track to put after White Elephant, which has so much drama, and it's really just like you said, a contemplation on the shuttered existence of the past year and how travel has been shut down, and we won't get to Amsterdam or that lake in Africa, and so on and so on. And not I think it's the shortest lyrical track on the record, and yeah, it's perhaps a theme that's been repeated by a lot of people this year, but they do a good job with it.
Right, right. And it's hard not to write or be inspired by your surroundings. That's how a lot of people write, and it just happens to be that we're all we're all kind of in the same surroundings in the last little while, right? So it's hard not to write in such a way that it's not gonna. It's hard to write right now in this environment that it doesn't become oversaturating the market with all these kind of thematic songs. But it is what it is, and I think he does a good enough job taking a different approach that I haven't heard in other songs.
Yeah, he does. I just think he does a nice treatment of the common theme of the present time,
Right.
and he speaks about how travel shut down, but he incorporates how people, because of that, loved ones and family members have been separated as well,
Hmm.
and that's where he builds and concludes on this idea: we won't get to anywhere, darling, unless you take me there.
Right. Right.
And so I think it sort of builds on this idea that you have to keep each other in your minds, even though you can't be together physically.
So Shattered Ground is the second last song on the album. It is actually one of my highlight songs. I really enjoyed Shattered Ground.
Okay, what was it that you really liked about it?
I thought he got back to his aggression here after White Elephant. I thought this was the first time he gets back to the aggression because it's the only other time on the album where he swears, and the build up from the last time he swore was through Albuquerque and Lavender Fields, which is like 10 minutes ago, and he's just gone through this wistful area, but he gets into this love song, but he gets very defensive and aggressive about it. If I can reference a lyric here, only you are beautiful, only you are true. I don't care what they're saying. They can scream their fucking faces blue. And I enjoyed that he came back to this aggressive nature, and it was very expressive, and his performance was really good on the song. Some of the lyrics again I liked was a madness in her and a madness in me, and together it forms some sort of sanity.
Hmm. Yeah, I found with this song, there are moments of aggression, but the overall tone of the song was much more in a mode that you would associate with balladry.
Right, it is kind of like a love song, absolutely. But I just felt like he had more gusto in his performance with this one.
Yeah, I wish there was more gusto, I guess is my critique. Just I'm a little bit nostalgic, and so that's why I wanted to speak about this record, because I'm a longtime fan and you're sort of a little bit new to their music. So you would come to it with a maybe less bias and nostalgic perspective.
Right, and maybe this is a song that comes out on, because I thought this was his best vocal performance, even though the musically it's very sparse and atmospheric. and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't do a lot there, but I think Cave carries it through his performance on this album, and it really makes it more tangible and easier to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly right. I'll maybe have to go back to this song, but it didn't. I guess just based on what I was saying earlier, I was becoming a little bit fatigued after Lavender.
This is the problem. I kind of found this as well, and I kind of was wondering because this album isn't that long of an album. It's a 40-minute album, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about that fatigue because I also felt it, and I think it comes from um, these songs being so long. Um, each song individually is such a lengthy song at like 5 minutes at average that I think it you're going through the same song and the same sound throughout a 5 minute passage at a time as you're listening to this album. That the pacing kind of it gets hurt a little bit because of the length of songs, and I think that might be what's adding to your fatigue a bit. Because by the time you get to Lavender Fields and Shattered Ground, you're at your 30 minute, your 35 minutes, and with such like long stretches of time committed to a certain song, I think it can add to your fatigue.
I think for me, it wasn't necessarily so much the length of the songs, but when you get halfway through White Elephant, a uniformity of sound begins to take place.
Okay.
And so by the time I get to Shattered Ground, and the sound is not that different from what has happened on the past two and a half songs, that I didn't pay as much attention to it as I should have, or as I would like to.
Right, and I think that also gets a little bit of blame put on Lavender Fields again, which I think is the weakest track on the album,
Yeah.
personally. I think it does hurt a little bit because after 4.5 minutes of that song, to go into Shattered Ground, which doesn't immediately emphasize its point and get into that aggression, it kind of takes a bit to build into that song. That it's asking a bit of you to connect back into it.
Yeah, yeah, that, and I think they sense that, that the sound on the record in the second half was becoming a bit uniform, and so they really wanted to, like you said, give this song some gusto to try to hook people back in. Give some variance in the tone, give some variance in the mood that was becoming a little bit monotonous.
Right. So, how did you feel about the very last song? We'll go to Balcony Man, eighth track, final track on the album.
Balcony Man, I came at Balcony Man from a lyrical perspective, and I'm a little bit conflicted because I like the lyrics up until the refrain towards the end, which repeats, "This morning is amazing, and so are you." It seems a little bit cheesy to me.
Yeah, that's a little cheesy. When you read it out loud, it definitely comes off a little cheesy. I think he does a lot in his performance of the line to make it sound more compelling, and a cheesy line in the middle of his better writing and some of these other stuff that I think kind of gives him a little bit of freedom to get off some of those lines. It's kind of why I felt like his first moment where he swears and comes crass and gets very short and aggressive was very compelling. The same way I think sometimes you can get off a little more cheesy lines and get away with it if you're up to snuff in all these other areas.
Well, I think this song is again another COVID related song, and it's just talking about people who are stuck at home and stuck on their balconies and they can't really go outside. And I think the concluding line of this song summarizes the point of the song the best. And what doesn't kill you just makes you
Yes,
crazier.
right.
Meaning that this being quarantined at home isn't going to kill you, but it's going to is driving everybody crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think maybe it justifies the lyrics I had problems with earlier, but that you cited about the octopus. I'm a 200-pound octopus under a sheet. Like it's a little bit crazy, it's a little bit zany, but I think everyone is feeling a little bit crazy and zany after the past year. So
So in the end, I'm kind of curious to hear your perspective in the grand scheme of the Nick Cave albums that you're familiar with, which is probably way more than myself, how did this album fit to you?
This album, how did it fit? It's certainly new, but I don't think they embraced the new sound. Like this seems like it's still a work in progress a little bit. And of course, it should be noted that they didn't release underneath the Bad Seeds moniker. And as we mentioned, maybe for COVID related reasons, that's why they didn't. But at the same time, like this isn't going to be a Bad Seeds record, and so it doesn't really, to me, have the Bad Seeds stamp of approval. It's not a Bad Seeds record.
Okay,
It's something outside that discography.
it's something else.
Yeah, it's something else. And like I said, it seems like they're developing a sound, but it's just not there yet. And I think it's obvious based on how the second half of the record turned out.
Okay. But did you find like how I was reading a little bit around um, that you enjoyed some of the return to aggression and return to like that kind of swagger that Nick Cave has kind of had long kind of swept under the rug.
Yeah, I enjoyed how he became aggressive in his lyrics and how his recent lyrical style that is very image based and sort of cryptic, and how he is able to use sinister imagery, with the elephant gun made of tears. I thought that was a great line, and it's a great image. And I like it when he assumes a point of view, like he does on the Murder Ballads record,
Hmm.
and he does really great lyrical performances and very great vocal performances when he's sort of playing a character. And I would like to see that going forward on the next Bad Seeds record.
Okay. Um, I was kind of leaning on your opinions to kind of shape mine of this album a little bit because I came up kind of unsure of how I felt about this. It was really a non-starter for me, honestly. The first track, the first two tracks, it was hard for me to get past them a lot of the time when I was listening and kind of like picking them apart. It wasn't until Carnage that I thought the album picked up some steam and started gripping me and making me more attentive to the album. And once I got to that point, I was able to go back to some of the beginning tracks and appreciate them better. So I was a
Hmm.
little unsure of how I ultimately felt about this, and specifically since yesterday, I think during one of my later listens, I finally kind of like pulled the pieces together and kind of started enjoying a lot more of what I was hearing. But it was a little
Yeah.
bit of a tough build for me.
Hmm. And so you found the first half of the record hard to get into.
I would say the first two songs,
Hmm.
more specifically, "Hand of God" and "Old Time." While I did enjoy them to a certain degree, their length became a fatigue for me, and I did kind of get lost a little bit in his kind of baritone voice, and just kind of like it was hard for me to grip onto things. And then I was reading the lyrics, and he was a little obtuse. I had struggled to really grip onto those, and I was kind of a loss for what it was with this album that I uh, was going to engage with me.
So what track would you recommend for people to, yeah, dip their toe in if they're just gonna listen to one track?
I would say the title track "Carnage."
Yeah, I think it's either Carnage or White Elephant.
While I believe White Elephant is probably the best song on the album, I think Carnage is more encompassing of what's happening here. Um, White Elephant is almost an outlier in certain respects.
I don't know. I think it's the track that has
It's the most
it.
well placed and most well paced and has the most compelling lyrics. It's definitely the best song.
I think it reflects the front and the back half of the album, the way that the song's split in two.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. I wasn't thinking about the second half. It does kind of incorporate the two sides of the album. You're right. You're correct. I probably agree with you then.
Yeah, but Carnage is also a great toe-in song.
I also wouldn't be amiss in suggesting shattered ground, in my opinion. But I know you were a little more conflicted with that song.
I mean, maybe if you took it on its own, it
Right.
would be different. But when you're listening to the record front to back, the pacing on the back end of the album, for me, even this song "Balcony Man," like as a concluding track, it's I guess it works, but a little bit weak, maybe.
Yeah, I thought Balcony Man was a little weak. Probably it was fine. I think Lavender Fields weighs down the second half. I liked Albuquerque and Shattered Ground fine, and I thought Balcony Man was passable and decent, and Lavender Fields was just too fluffy and like non unneeded. I thought so. The second half
Hmm.
was a little more weaker than the first half, but I still enjoyed. I think there's definitely strengths in the second half. So
Yeah,
what would
so
you rate this totally?
um, I would give it a 7. I would say
7. I
I would
think
give.
I'm kind of in agreement here. I think while we kind of split a little bit in the parts that we liked in parts of the album, I think I still come to that kind of like 7. I was working on like a 6 for a while, but during my last listens and kind of really kind of gelling with the album and kind of finding my groove within it and what I liked about it, yeah, it boosted up to a 7 that I was a little more confident with.
Yeah, I would say it just makes the 7 for me
Hmm.
because there are some just really standout tracks, but yeah, the back half really weighs it down a little bit. People, if you listen to it and like it, go pick it up, but actually, it's not going to appear in record stores until May, and you can only find Carnage on streaming services at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Well, did you? I have a few things that you want to talk to you about before we close this episode out. The other
Hmm.
day, I I that's gonna be. I was going to send you a picture, okay, and I want you to read it out for me. Um, so for a little bit of context, I'm going to send this to the Discord. For a little bit of
Yeah.
context, this is a picture. Uh, the other day, I make sure I'm picking the right one now. Yep. Okay, so I found a website that I used to visit when I was 12, 13, 14, that range of time. And I sent the
Hmm.
picture along. And I went back and found posts I made when I was 12 and 13, which was the most cringiest experience you could ever imagine, is to have some sort of vault of things that you would say when you were that age. So this is over half my life ago that this post has come from, and what I've sent it into
Uh,
the Discord. If it's 3 posts by me. If you could read these for me.
okay, 12-year-old Brandon says, rap, it can just crawl up in a corner and die for all I care. Chokes Nelly.
could you explain how I spelt crawl?
Okay, yeah, he spells crawl incorrectly, CRAL.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's no punctuation, everything's lowercase. And then, yeah, he has some angry looking, I don't know, special characters placed before a sentence.
That's the cover up my swearing.
Uh-huh, okay.
Actually,
Yeah.
it's supposed to imply fuck pop, fuck rap.
Okay, okay, I see.
I wasn't so creative back in the day.
Um, this is funny. Jokes Nelly, die you son of a bitch. Um, yeah, I used to listen to Nellyville all the time actually when we were this age.
Uh,
And then at the end, to conclude these aggressive and violent remarks, you say, "Up with System of a Down and other bands."
so my opinion back when I was 12 was pop and rap they suck, but bands like System of a Down, although good band, those other bands that I didn't mention, not not defendable. I'm talking about Disturbed. I'm talking about Seether. I'm talking about All those cringe metal bands. I'm like Korn. I'm pretty sure probably listened to like the first Slipknot album at this point. Some of these are better than other albums. I'm not trying to discourage Slipknot, but Drowning Pool, any song that came on before WWE pay per view back in like 2005, that was on there. Bodies. That's what I'm defending here with all this other stuff. So I thought that was really amusing that what my musical takes at 12 years old.
Yeah, well, I mean, usually when you're that age, you're very much in one camp and against all the others.
I thought it was kind of funny that my musical take at 12 is basically your musical take today.
Hey, that's not true. I like Brass. That was a great record.
Yeah, you did like Brass. You did like Brass.
But I'm just more selective over rap music these days because I think some of the tropes and motifs and content of especially gangster rap to be rather atrocious and disgusting.
Another reason, by the way, that we were late this week with our upload is besides this album being kind of a non-starter for me and struggle getting into this, is we wanted to talk about this other album, Tobacco, release called "Fucked Up Friends 3." And Mosier, I'm pretty sure you hated it from my perspective, from the way you were describing it.
I was cursing your name, yeah. I was like, I can't believe he's getting us to review this record. Like, I did not like it at all. It was just full of saturated synths, and like I described to you, it sounded like some new wave artist from 1984 got wasted on some cheap whiskey and sat down at the soundboard and just started hitting buttons.
I certainly will defend Tobacco's other releases that I liked, including his main album releases for other Black Moth Super Rainbow. But this album was a bunch of B-sides. It didn't really have the melodic density that I was hoping for. So I kind of came to, because Zach didn't mention anything to me, I just kind of came and I said, maybe we'll switch albums this week. And we did the Nick Cave one instead. I think you were. I just also felt it was an all instrumental album too, and it's just a difficult album to talk about sometimes. So I just wanted to mention it lightly in passing here at the end because we were going to cover it, but it just ended up being too disinteresting or too grating for some people to listen to. So we ended up switching.
Yeah, we didn't want to inflict that pain on you people.
There's also a few things I became more aware of that are coming out that I'm kind of interested in. There's this new Uma record that's coming down the line. There was a single she released called Nebula that was really, really good that I would recommend people checking out. When that album drops, I'll be checking it myself. There's also a very funky and tasty track that was released by a Korean artist, I believe, called I'm gonna butcher her name. Yukika. Not sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Probably very wrong. But she's got this song called Love Month, and it's very J-poppy, K-poppy, but it's also very funky and has a lot of American influences as well. And it comes together in a very interesting way. And I'm not usually into that scene of J-pop or K-pop, and it's usually too bubblegummy and too produced for me. But this was an interesting, more compelling pocket that I was definitely into. So that's another album I think maybe we might touch on a little bit going forward. And also, there's a few other ones, but those are the ones that kind of came to me while I was listening to not too long ago and got interested. I did hear the first of those Shoo records that you were talking about, and I definitely enjoyed what I heard, so I'm excited to see when that album drops as well.
Yeah, I mean, they've practically released half of the album already.
Probably. I've only heard the one.
I only listened to one song too, but almost every other week they're releasing a song or two.
Right. It might be a long album, honestly. I believe the one I heard was Rompus Room.
Rompus Room, okay. I can't recall now. It's been almost a month since I listened to tracks that they released in anticipation of their new record, but Rumpus Room is the track, along with A Bottle of Rum, which is the title track of the album that they released this past week.
Okay. So I had heard some of those. I was very interested, and some of these other tracks I wanted to highlight a little bit because I really enjoyed those as well. Also, there. Oh yeah, I just forgot. This is going to sound a little on the more mainstream side. That wouldn't sound like something I'd be interested in. But I listened to a track they released under. Let me get the name right because they have their own name, even though they're two very well artists. No artists. Silk Sonic. Now this is a collaborative album between uh, uh, 1 second now. I get the names right.
Is this the one between Bruno Mars and?
Yes, this is Bruno Mars and Anderson Paak, and I really really enjoyed this song that they released. I believe it's called "Leave the Door Open," and so they have an album coming together that I think would be interesting for us to cover because I really enjoy Anderson Paak, and on terms of that pop side, I thought Bruno Mars is one of the more talented performers out there.
Yeah, Bruno Mars's vocals are they're a bit hit and miss for me, but I do like Anderson Paak, and maybe with this duo, it'll Bruno Mars will be able to deliver something that I find him to be a little bit juvenile in his lyrical delivery.
Sure, sure. So I think this might be a more mature approach.
Towards a younger audience, and it doesn't appeal to me so much. But maybe with Anderson Paak, yeah, they'll be able to do something interesting.
Right. I think it could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. But all right, those are just a few things I wanted to comment on before we headed out. Thanks everyone for listening. Please, leave it a like, subscribe, share it is the most helpful thing you can do if you enjoy these or want to help us out in any way. I really appreciate it. But I think I think I give this album a light recommend. The Carnage. I think it's definitely enjoyable. I think there's tracks on here that take away and enjoy. If you're a more long-time Nick Cave listener, what would you say, Zach? Do you think Nick Cave fans should definitely check this one out?
Yeah, for sure. Just the track where they're going with this sound, especially in the first half of the record. And I mean, most longtime Cave fans are going to be checking it out anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you're a little bit new to the band, I think it's in a way sort of a good entry point because it does summarize a lot of the different sounds that Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds have done over the years. So